Love Your Kitchen, Designing the Heart of the Home, proudly sponsored by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. I'm your host, Faye Newman, a freelance kitchen designer with a passion for creating spaces that truly reflect the heart of the home. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Love Your Kitchen podcast. As ever, thank you very much for joining me. So today's episode is going to be how to tailor your kitchen design based on how you use the space and which sort of genre of clientele you fit into. Are you a person that likes to eat out and then maybe has, drinks at home? Are you a person that likes to cook everything from scratch and you want to, you need lots of storage space, you need specific sort of cooking functions to help with that? Wherever you sit sort of within that pipeline, what I'll be doing today is just talking you through tangible points to think about just to enhance your upcoming kitchen design, to make sure that the space is completely tailored to how you need to use it from a day-to-day basis, and to make it easier for you as well. You don't want to spend lots of time, creating these beautiful kitchens or designs and then actually realise that when it's installed, it just doesn't function and work specific for your needs. And that also doesn't mean that you have to go for a completely bespoke design, lots of pullouts everywhere. It can just be a few clever points which we'll go into today that will help you, in the long run of how you will use that space. So it doesn't have to cost you lots of money either. So I've got a question for you. Do you ever feel like you struggle with how, or the efficiency of how you use your space at the moment? Is it a case of the layout isn't working for you anymore? Is it the case of you just don't think you have enough worktop space to do the prep and the things that you need to do? It might be a case of you seem to have lots of cabinets, but from a storage perspective, you're still having to take everything out of a cupboard to be able to find the item that you want at the back. Whatever it might be, whatever are the points that are annoying you about your kitchen, at the moment, I'm hoping to cover a few topics today, specifically for the avid cooks and the social butterflies, to help you create a kitchen design that is completely tailored to how you need to use that space. So let's start with the avid cooks out there. So these are the clients that I work with all of the time, where your lifestyle is somebody that, cooks everything from scratch, likes to make new recipes and explore sort of food in general. Maybe they like to bake frequently as well. It might be a case of you host dinner parties. You like to, create a community in your space and bring all of your lovely friends and family over, to enjoy all of your beautiful food. You might also as well grow a lot of your own produce. So you have a lot of fresh goods, be cut or food coming into that, that kitchen space fairly frequently. Whatever it might be from your case, it's that that this kitchen is the most used room in the house. So you need to make sure that it's right for you and perfectly tailored to how you cook and also, bake, things like that. So my first point to you, if you feel like you fall under this category, is prioritise ample counter space. So I cannot stress this enough. I find that now the sort of trend is to have lots of large built-in pieces, larder cabinets or pieces of furniture, which is amazing and looks beautiful. But I do think from a function perspective, we are missing out on just counter space in order to have, a space where you can prep the food that you're cooking with, a space where you can, put a pile of, ingredients, your spices. I know how many spices I cook with, so I've got probably about 6, dried herbs out, maybe some fresh garlic, whatever it might be. You've just got a designated space, next to your or in your cooking zone that is, perfect for that. and then also dishing up as well. If you fall under this category and you bake and you cook a lot, you don't want to limit yourself on worktop space. I would say that should be your main focus for sure, or one of them anyway. What you can do to compare what you've got at the moment and how you feel about that is measure the space that you currently work with at the moment. So I know we've got a small sort of, I'd say it's a U-shaped kitchen, but it doesn't come out as much as the standard sort of U-shapes on the one side. So where we've got our cooking facilities, on the left-hand side of the hob, we've got 500 mil, and then on the right-hand side, it sort of leads into a corner. So I know I've got, just over 600 mil into that corner, and then I've got a big worktop space leading then to where my sink is. So there I know I've got my prep zone to the left of my hob, and then I've got space to serve up if there's multiple dishes and things that we're creating on the right hand side, or if you're putting it onto trays and things like that. You should just have your system, but analyze your system and then see what works, what you need more of, and then that will determine sort of how much worktop space you might need. It might be a case of you're maybe incorporating a beautiful big island, and you don't want to interfere with having any sort of appliances on there. Again, just to give you a really big space to, serve up maybe. Whatever that might be, just find a system that works for you, or maybe like a peninsula, where it sort of comes round a little bit more, so it just gives you that little bit more space to maybe put a few extra ingredients, or as I said, keep or plating up the beautiful food that you've just produced. So yeah, make sure that that's a main consideration for you when you're designing your kitchen. Next is defining your working zones, which is crucial to any kitchen design, but this is probably the biggest point for you to consider if you do love to cook and that space and your kitchen is going to be used for so many different tasks on a day-to-day basis. So when you're looking into your zones, it's important. I always start with your cooking appliances. Essentially, I think they're the sort of items that can be the most variable. To me, a sink is a sink. Dishwasher is usually by the sink, so that. And then, of course, we'll go into sort of fridge and freezer. So your cooking is the one that can be changed around the most. You might have an under-counter, oven at the moment, and then a hob on the top. But it might be a case of you want to lift that oven up, put that into a tower cabinet, and then have your hob on the island. So it's just making sure that you're considering the distances and positioning of those appliances, so they're sort of clustered together, so that when you're in cooking mode, you've got everything in one place and you're not having to walk 3 meters to your beautiful big larder towers where you've got all of your lovely cooking equipment in. You don't have to walk 3 meters to your oven there and then walk back to find some worktop space or to use a hob on an island, for instance. So that's really important. So that's zone number 1, which is cooking, the cooking appliances. Next, you've got your cleaning. So this would be your wet area for your sinks, dishwashers, bins as well. I always like to pop this in the same entity. If you've got a waste disposal unit that fits underneath your plug of your sink, then again, that's all in the same vicinity. You might also have, a hot tap. So again, that, will mean that you've got cleaning zone, but then also you need sort of a tea and coffee station or cupboard sort of nearby to help with, when you're looking to make drinks and things like that. So cleaning zone is a fairly obvious one. Again, this will be determined on your plumbing positioning sort of currently. If you're obviously getting a new floor, you can be a little bit more flexible normally if you want to go for a sink sort of on the island. But best practice is the sink is usually, around the sort of, the wall space that you have in your kitchen. And it might be a case of you feel like you need a second sink, so you need a prep sink maybe on the island, or in a tea and coffee station, whatever it might be, but just think how you use that space. I think that's the biggest thing that I would say to you. So if it's a case of you're finding that when you're having to rinse food, again, you're walking to where the sink is currently, and you just find yourself walking back and forth. If it's a case of you're filling the kettle up every 5 minutes because you've got it on the side and then you're walking to your tap in order to fill that up, think logically of just how you use that space, and then it's just about how to make it really easy, and easier for you to use, and therefore more efficient for how you like to make your beautiful food. Next is preparation zone. So again, this is what I emphasised earlier about just round your hob area or in your cooking sort of facility. Make sure that you've got a dedicated sort of prep zone, and make sure that's big enough to prepare all the beautiful food that you've got, to actually, chop it, and then also have maybe the food at the back, and then all of your beautiful spices, fresh herbs, that sort of thing. The fourth zone is fresh goods zone. So this would be, I would say, where you keep all of your, your fresh veg. So again, if you fall under the category of having, lots of fresh produce, whether you make that, or grow that yourself, or it might be a case of you just, nutrition is really important and you like to make everything from scratch, you normally have a really full fridge and maybe a less full freezer, unless you're really organised and you like to, make and then freeze ready for a rainy day. So fresh goods zones would include any sort of like your pantry with your pantry goods in, but also your fridge position and maybe your freezer again here. But it's all about making sure that, again, you've got a designated zone to sort of go over to, get all of the fresh produce that you might need out of the fridge, and then also the pantry. So again, it's all in sort of one cluster, shall we say, of your kitchen design. It's just useful, and likewise, it doesn't always work like that, but equally, if you're just thinking about these in sort of level of importance as we're going down, and just logically thinking about what and where you're going to store everything, it just makes it more efficient and easier to use. You've then also got your eating zone as well. So this will be, if where you're plating up, like if you've got your your cutlery, any sort of dinner plates or things like that. So if you are a keen dinner party host, we all love a dinner party, making sure that you've got your placemats near the kitchen table or around your island, however you're wanting to, to format that space. Sauces, things like that. That's what sort of, that's where, that should usually go, within your kitchen. And it's just, maybe a smaller consideration, but equally it can help. So making sure that you're well versed on the kitchen zones. And it might be a case of you're listening and you're thinking, Faye, I do this anyway, which is great if you do, but bring that knowledge that you have, from using your kitchen every day currently into your new kitchen design as well. And don't just be like, oh, you fell in love with a display in a showroom and you're like, yeah, this will work perfectly for me, because, it might not. And it's just making sure that, again, you're tailoring your kitchen design to best suit how you use that space. Whenever I work with any keen cooks, I always find near the sort of the front end of the topics that we speak about, like when we're talking about how we use the space, things like that, usually they will ask me about appliance choices. They will want to know, different sort of cooking methods that are available now. And I find that they come in with maybe a brand that they've used and they swear by and they're really happy about, or it might be a case of they've got more cost-effective options at the moment and they're just having lots of trouble with them, or it might be a case of they're not actually that cost-effective but they keep breaking. So you just want, really reliable, and you want to be aware of all of the amazing cooking functions that are out at the moment. I've got 3 suggestions for you that I would love for you to consider when you are looking out for your new suite of appliances for your kitchen design. So the first one is, as I mentioned, if you've got a brand that you really like, or maybe go to a brand that you know has good reviews on the site, or that has just been highly recommended, maybe from friends and family, I would see if they do sort of showroom tours of their appliances. So this isn't sort of around a kitchen showroom. Usually they have their own sort of headquarters, dependent on how big a company they are. And you can actually go visit and get expert advice from everybody, that's there. I've done this for a fair few of my clients. So even if it's a case of course, I would help them with appliance choices, but if they're looking at different specs and models, and from a price perspective, there might be big jumps, or it might be a case of, there's not too much of a difference between them, and the reviews might again be quite similar, but they just want to know the difference between the two and to find the appliance that's right for them. I always find just sending them off, and or maybe me going with them as well, and just being like, look, these I feel would work perfectly for you. These are the differences between each of these models. And then you can choose then which you want to go for. Like, do you want to go for the oven that has the food probe in, if that's really important for you? It might be a case of you go and do, one of the tours, and they're saying something to you that just isn't relevant. You might have your own sort of freestanding appliances, like a bread maker or different things that you just think, actually, I've already got that at home, so therefore it doesn't resonate with you. So it's just making sure that you know all of the options, and you can ask any questions as well. So if you go directly to, the brand that you're looking to buy from an appliance perspective, you can ask them all of the juicy questions about, whatever it might be. No question is silly, and they can just give you expert advice from there. So that would be, one major sort of consideration that I would recommend for anybody, that if you're baking a lot, or if you're, cooking a lot yourself, again, I would strongly recommend that. And they're normally free to do. Also look out for home economists in local showrooms and things like that. So if you know that you love Neff appliances, a lot of Neff sort of showrooms, yes, they sell other appliance brands as well, but they sometimes have sort of a home economist come from Neff to do cooking demonstrations on, the fairly normal cooking functions, but also some of the more innovative as well. And you can try and test the food from there and see what you think. Another key point to consider as an avid cook is, of course, your ventilation. So making sure that you've got good extraction within that space, whether it's a venting hob or a downdraft extractor, or if it's a case of, it's a mantle section like this, or a, wall mounted. Make sure that you're looking into, models that have a high extraction rate. Also check out the noise of it as well. So 40 to sort of 55 is considered sort of quite low from a noise perspective for your extractor. Anything between sort of 55 and 60 or 65 is sort of standard, but you can, it's quite noisy within that space. Anything sort of 65 above, it will be really noisy. So just make sure, especially if you're in a small space as well, obviously you'll hear that more, or if you're in an open planned space, just have, an extra consideration. And if there is a quieter option, of course, look into that. What I will say is, if you can duct out, then that's usually best practice to make it as efficient as possible. Limit the sort of amount of bends that you've got, don't sort of Tetris it together so that you can duct out of a wall. Make sure it's usually just a pipe that runs sort of up and then to the right, and then it might duct straight out of a wall, for instance, or it might be sort of a 1 meter kit that goes, it usually ducts around, so you have like a bend and then go straight out, the wall at the back if it's wall mounted. Of course, if it's vented, like a venting hob, it gets a little bit more complicated. But again, if you can duct it out, that is best practice. But if for whatever reason, like you can't, maybe it's too far to go, the filters are really efficient now. So again, it's more looking into the extraction rates of the actual appliance itself, the noise, and also just making sure that you're cleaning those filters regularly as well. So my last point for all of you avid cooks out there regarding appliances is, even though you probably have, you know, a system at home at the moment and appliances that you use and you know how to cook, I would be open to new suggestions of, you know, different cooking styles and different ways to cook maybe the everyday things that you do now. I find that there's so many different sort of ways to, you know, cook now. Like steam is really popular, and of course it should be, because it keeps everything nice and beautifully moist in the center but crispy on the exterior, especially if you're baking bread. And it's gone away with the days where you literally put a tray underneath with water at the bottom, and then getting that steam from there. It can actually be integrated more sort of within your appliances now, and sort of injected at certain times within that cooking cycle to enhance the flavour and keep all of those beautiful natural nutrients in the food. Also, as well, you've got sous vide cooking. So sous vide cooking is something that I used to see on like MasterChef, or you've seen it on Gordon Ramsay's, sort of when he's doing his Michelin star food. It's something now that is so readily available to actually have within your home, and it's really great. And I think it's one of those sort of investments that is an investment, but equally it's, again, will just save you time from a marinating perspective, like making sure that you've got, if you're doing any sort of meats or anything like that. I've also had an infused gin cocktail sort of, you know, made with it as well and put within one of the vacuum bags. Also, the vacuum bags are really small and you can efficiently, you know, stack them within your fridge. So there's lots and lots of positives for them. So I just want to make sure, or just a reminder, that although you love to cook at the moment and you know your way around a kitchen, which is amazing, just be open to, you know, different suggestions. And again, it's not about going for all of the new latest functions. It's just about making sure that you have all of the information so that you can make your mind up of what the best sort of cooking functions would be for you. Next, we have the social butterflies. So I know that there's probably a lot of you out there, or maybe you're probably not listening to this podcast because you're actually out socialising, which would be, you know, very ironic but quite funny. So if you're a social butterfly, your lifestyle would mean that the kitchen, you know, is the heart of the home. It's a place for family gatherings, entertaining friends and family, and maybe, you know, casual dining as well. It might be that cooking is sort of the secondary part of the conversation. It might be a case of you know, the first and foremost is just to get everybody together. It might just be for drinks, whatever it is. You just like to have lots of different sort of, you know, family and friends within one space, and you know, we need to make sure that we've got key considerations from a design perspective in place to make that easier for you and ensure that you can enhance your hosting abilities further by incorporating, you know, some of these design points that I'm going to be talking about now. So first of all, when I'm working with a social butterfly, I always start with, how do you actually host or entertain at the moment? So this is a big one because, as I mentioned, it might be a case of you like to have sit-down meals and then you have maybe a fair few drinks afterwards. It might be a case of you have people around sort of mid-morning for like a cup of tea. Maybe, you know, you've made some, you know, some snacks, things like that. It might be a case of you actually eat out, but then you are the central hub for everybody to come home to and continue, you know, the sort of conversations at home. So figure out sort of, you know, how you host, and then that will ultimately sort of help, one, your kitchen designer with how to, to design that space for you, but also from your perspective, making sure that you've got key considerations in different areas. So let's start with the seating options. If it's just drinks, I would say, an overhang on your kitchen island, or consideration of having sort of high stools somewhere, is always really popular. It means that you can be sort of, within the vicinity, especially if you're cooking as well alongside that. You can have a guest sort of sitting down and talking to you, while you're cooking away. If you're doing this, some key considerations, especially if they're going to be sat there for a long time, is go for a stool that has a high back still. Just to make it as comfortable as possible. Look at the upholstery on and padding, of the seat, which again is fairly obvious, but sometimes the design aspects of, stools and different ways that we dress the space afterwards sometimes gets missed because you love how maybe minimalistic something looks, but just be considerate of that. Also as well, you could look to incorporate a footrest sort of bar going around the section of where your guests are sitting. One big factor I would say is the positioning of these stools as well. So if you have lots of guests over, again, make sure it's more integrated as opposed to just all sat in a straight line looking at you cooking. What I would do in this instance is make sure that you're putting sort of your seats or your stools on like a corner or like an end, or it might be a case of, if you've got an island, to have seats going all the way around the sides but also the back as well. So again, it's a really inviting place for your guests or your family and friends to sit, chat away. Maybe if you're, drinking some more, or maybe it's a case of, as you say, if you're cooking away. And it just means that, there's lots of room and everybody can sort of see each other from where they're sat. So that's really important. If it's a case of you haven't got lots of overhangs, or maybe you've just got, overhangs, as I mentioned, sort of on the end and then to the one side, and it might not be across the whole way, you could look at rounding off your kitchen furniture as well if you want to. So a topic that comes up on the show a lot as well is just your perch points. So just making sure that actually when you think about how your guests use the space and where they stand at the moment, if you've got a curved section or something that's a little bit more inviting to stand up against or lean up against than, a sharp worktop edge, again, just thinking about that. Or it might be a case of you've got enough stools for everybody, which is perfect as well. If you love to host dinner parties, what I would recommend for you is, I would always have personally a separate table and chairs. Granted, I know that everybody's spaces sometimes can't fit that in, as well as maybe wanting to include, seats on the island. But again, it's about making a kitchen design that is fit for purpose and tailored for you. But I would say if you can keep a separate table and chairs arrangement somewhere, whether it's in a separate room or whether it's incorporated within maybe a kitchen diner or an open plan living space, it's just somewhere where that even if people are perching and they're having, a drink or, a glass of champagne while you're cooking away, whatever it might be, they'll be there at the island. Then when you go over to the table, when the food's ready, you've got that designated space which is separate to the kitchen. And it's also just comfier to sit on a low level sort of seat, feet touching the floor. It's just a bit more comfortable for everybody. So I'd always recommend to keep your tables and chairs. It might be a case of, if you don't want just a standard table and chairs, what you can do is look to incorporate like a bench seating arrangement up against a wall, or it might be a case of you're incorporating a beautiful banquette seating arrangement, whether that's coming off the island or whether that's a separate entity in itself, whatever it might be. Again, just make sure that you've got sort of low level alternative, to a dining room table, but you're still getting the comfort and efficiency from that space. What I usually do when I'm designing a kitchen for a family or for clients that do need to take these considerations into account and, you know, want maybe a fairly big table or chairs, or want it to be as big as possible within a space, is measure what they have at the moment if they're looking to reuse that, and then work the kitchen design around that. Or equally, you know, find a kitchen table and, you know, the chairs that they're sort of looking at, find like an average size for that, and then work back from that to make sure that we're allowing enough walkways, like the islands not eating into, you know, the table space that's needed. Or it might be you just don't want everything to feel really squashed. I've got a great example of this that I worked with clients who literally opened up their space to this beautiful big room. We had the kitchen in the one corner, beautiful islands. They wanted a 10-seater table, which was then, you know, parallel but behind the islands. And then they had a big, you know, sofa section with like a big L-shaped sofa, and then they had the media wall as well on the one side. And the actual kitchen size, so the actual room, was 9 meters by 6 meters wide, so beautiful big space. But actually, by the time that we considered the 10-seater table, obviously added all the cabinetry in that we needed into the kitchen side of things, so like the appliance choices, like a full height fridge, full height freezer, that sort of thing, if they wanted an extra larder. We then looked into the media wall and sort of, you know, was looking how wide and deep that needs to be, and dependent on the depth of that, that will of course determine the positioning of the L-shaped sofas. And the L-shaped sofas and the table was all going to be new, but we looked at average sort of sizes online of what they're sort of looking at, and I actually drew that in the space. Even though it's 6 meters, you know, wide, by the time that you've had your sink, maybe your, you know, your fixed sort of sink cabinet section on the one wall, you've got 600 mil depth, you know, for that cabinet. You've then got 1100 mil to 1200 mil if you can walkway. Then you've got an island that might be 1200 mil. Or I think in this case, yeah, it was 1200 mil in this case, if I remember rightly, because they had cabinets at the back and then the overhang. And then we had a table to consider and walkways around that table, as well as the seats as well, because not everybody's going to be tucked right the way underneath your table. By the time that we'd actually accounted for that, we realised that, you know, maybe the L-shaped sort of island, it just would not work for the space because of how big the table was. We would have needed to move that down to the other side of the room, but then that would have encroached into the media wall and the station and the L-shaped sort of sofas. So we had to, and also it was positioned beautifully by the big bifold doors the dining room was. So like it worked that once they're sat down they can see outside, so that was the best position for it. But you would think a space that size, everything would just fit in perfectly, but it's really, really, really important not just to focus on the kitchen design, but also how the other areas in that room, you know, will work. For the social butterflies that don't have an open plan space, like I've just mentioned, or maybe even a kitchen diner, a few considerations that I would look into is still see if there's a place that you can put some high level sort of stools, you know, within your space. It might be a case if you've got a U-shaped kitchen, can you add maybe like a little peninsula coming off the one side at the end, or can you incorporate, you know, a beautiful different worktop section like up against a wall, just so you've got, you know, that space to maybe have your breakfast in the morning, but also if a friend, you know, comes over, you're feeling less sort of, you know, just in the kitchen and want to be out of it as quickly as possible because you want to join on with the conversations that's happening in the other room. It just integrates you a little bit more, you know, within that space. So that's one thing that I would try to consider. Also, if you can't physically knock a wall through for whatever reason, just see if you can open up your doorways a little bit. It's always, you know, can feel quite claustrophobic sometimes if you just have like a 900 mil you know, standard doorway width. If you can open that up a bit and maybe incorporate like a sliding door, or, you know, doors that can be left open, if it is a case of you've got, a lot of, guests roaming around the house or whatever, again, you just feel a little bit more integrated. But of course, make sure again that you've got a good extractor, because you don't want the smell of onions just going around the whole house or whatever you might be cooking. But again, it's something simple that your doorway is already there. So from a structural perspective, it might not be too much to change. But just look into that. Or you could even do away with the door entirely if you wanted to, remove your architrave, around it, and just have that beautiful sort of free flowing space, whatever your preference is. One thing I would say, if you are a social butterfly, is you usually have maybe like a DIY setup of a drink station at home. So I would say that looking and seeing if you can incorporate a designated sort of drink station into your kitchen design, would be quite desirable for you. Or maybe an extension of the kitchen could be added into, where you're mainly doing your hosting, you're all sat down, that sort of thing, whether that's a freestanding piece of furniture or whether that's, out of the same cabinetry that you're, looking to have within your kitchen space, however that works for you. So 3 points I want you to think about if you are looking to incorporate a drink station within your kitchen is quite an obvious one to start with, but think about what is it that you drink. So there's so many different formats for internal cabinets and sizes and different sort of trinkets that you can have within a drink station. But actually think, what is it that you actually drink? It might be a case of you have lots of mixers, so you have spirit-based drinks, cocktails, and you have lots of mixers around, like your softies, big 1 litre bottles of, say, lemonade, Coke, things like that. So again, that's going to take quite a big space. Is it a case of you have, gin and tonic? So you've got your tonic waters, usually a little bit smaller. They might come in like cans if it's sparkling, things like that. Are you a wine lover? And you want maybe a designated space to store your wine at a nice temperature. If it's a case of you are, a white drinker, again, of course, you'll need to pop that drink station either close to your fridge, or you can do it where, you've got a wine cooler, maybe built in underneath, whatever sort of your preference. If it's a case of you're a red drinker, you might still want to keep the wine at optimal sort of temperatures. So then again, I would go for a dual temperature wine cooler that can help you, just keep everything at the right sort of temperatures that you need to, so that when your guests are over, that wine or, all of those drinks where you make and prepare are in that one space. One thing to think about as well, if you do make a lot of, cocktails, maybe you've got fresh garnishes, things like that, it's just making that a consideration as well. Do you actually want to make that drink, in that drink station? Do you need like a pull-out shelf to come to you? Is it a case of it's an extension of sort of like the kitchen worktops in there, so it's okay if it gets a little bit messy? Whatever it might be, how you use that space, and what it is that you need to store, that will sort of determine and start to pull together the format of how that cabinet should look for you. Once you've thought more about what you do drink, think about how you want that, that cabinet to look as well. I think when you're incorporating a drink station within your kitchen design, like this is where you can add all your personality and go crazy. Make sure it's got, sensor-driven lights as you open the door. You could look at going for like a beautiful sort of antique mirrored splashback in between your shelves. Again, you've probably got, worktop in there if you can. If it's an extension of sort of like your kitchen, you might have the worktop going all the way underneath already, and then it's a dresser that sits on top of the worktop. Or it might be a case of it's a freestanding larder. But again, see if you've got any offcuts from the slab of worktop that you've already bought for the rest of the kitchen, and see if you can incorporate it into that. Also as well, look to see if you can have a step up out of the, the worktop material at the back of that cabinet. So maybe all of the bottles that are in use, you can pop those at the back, and then they obviously, there, and you can locate them easily. if you're a few drinks in, which again, might happen. But that would be, go to town if you are including a drink station, because it's a really fun part of your design. And consider the doors as well. Like, make sure that you can have doors that stay open, so you can just show off, the beautiful design on the inside. The second point I want to make is ensure to incorporate ice somewhere. So think about your ice, how you're going to store it, where it's going to be stored, how much of it you need, how do you source your ice at the moment. My brother's been in the drinks industry pretty much all of his life, so he always has a bag of ice in his freezer. We've got an ice cube tray at home because, again, that works well for us. But usually if you're preparing a lot of drinks, you need a lot of ice. I mean, I've worked with a client before that we actually built a designated bar in their space, and their table was massive, or their hosting station was massive, purely because they had a lot of corporate events like ran sort of within the house. They ran their own business, it was a big family business, and they had a lot of their investors, things like that. They all used to gather, and their home used to be the pinnacle part of that. So we had to make sure that they've had a beautiful kitchen sort of diner and lounge section in the one room, but then the other side of the partition we had a big built-in bar section which just looked absolutely beautiful. But in there, one of the favourite parts for one of my clients was they invested in a 900 ml wide fridge drawer that you can get from Fisher and Paykel. And what's great about them is you can differ the temperatures in there. So if you want it to be fridge one day, freezer another day, or maybe just pantry storage, you can alter the temperatures. Yes, it's all one big compartment, but equally he literally just had that one big drawer full of ice. And for them, it just worked perfectly, because then they could, they've had spirits all in the one larder. They could just make everything, from that station in order to create all of the drinks that they needed. They also had a sink tap and a dishwasher section, which again is just really important to think about. Maybe positioning a glassware sort of dishwasher on your island, or incorporating it into a bar, as we've mentioned. Again, it's just making the whole process as efficient as possible for you. But one of his main plus points to the whole renovation, I helped them with 5 rooms in the house. His favourite thing was the ice straw. So definitely was a great investment for them, and it's because their design's tailored for them, and that's how all of our kitchens, all of your kitchens should be. They should be tailored to you as the end user, how you're going to use that space. You can also now get ice makers within freezers, so that's something to think about if you want to opt for an ice maker within your integrated appliance as well. You can get models that are like £7,000 to £9,000 plus. So again, that's quite a big investment. But equally, they're on sort of like an automation, and there's lots of different features that you can have within that integrated appliance. You can have more cost-effective models, which are like the 1,500 sort of £3,000 mark. But again, this is manual, and I would make sure to read the reviews of how that mechanism works, just to make sure it doesn't just constantly keep breaking. And then that's going to, of course, annoy you. And if it's not in use, it will take up quite a bit of space within your freezer. The third point I want to make is, and this is imperative for all kitchen designs, but especially if you do a lot of socialising, is make sure that you have considered the lighting in your room. So this isn't just your pendants and your task lighting, but where you're positioning your spotlights, for instance, like try not to pop it above somebody's head. Try to make sure that it's in comfortable position, so that you haven't got a light glaring into somebody's face. Make sure you've got dimmable ambient lighting as well. So maybe if you've got your main spotlights and you turn them off when you're relaxing of an evening, or if you are hosting, you want to turn the lights down. You don't want to have glaring just task lights everywhere. So just make sure you've thought about that ambient lighting and where that's positioned in the room. One top tip for this, which is fairly inexpensive, is position lights up at the top of your larder cabinets or wall cabinets. Again, it just creates a really nice atmosphere. So if the main lights are off, or even if they're still on and they're dimmable, again, it just makes everything look a bit more considered. So that would be my last point to think about, or design consideration to think about for one, a drink station, but also two, for social butterflies as a whole. I will do an episode to help everybody with busy lives as well, just to make sure that you are, or I'm sort of helping you find, the right tools and appliances and storage facilities that will work really well, for you if you're just on the go all the time and you need some help with that. That's all for this week's episode of the Love Your Kitchen podcast. I hope that today's episode has been really helpful for you, and maybe there's a fair few points that have resonated with you and you think, you want to start introducing that within your kitchen design, which is amazing. We'd love to hear the stories and the parts that you really enjoyed from today's episode. So please do get in touch on all of our social channels, which is at Love Your Kitchen Podcast. Also, if you're listening to this and thinking, this is too much for me to try and think about, or your family, and you need some professional help, I'm a freelance kitchen designer. I work remotely with clients all over the UK, and I would love to help you with your upcoming kitchen projects. So again, DM me on social platforms at Love Your Kitchen Podcast, or if you want to, see more of my designs, visit my website www.fayenewmandesign.com, where you can book in a discovery call. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you have liked what we have spoken about, why not like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, what you can do is click on the notification bell to keep yourself notified of all the new content to come.